Hello and welcome to the second part of our qualitative data analysis webinar series. Today we're going to talk a little bit more about how to analyze your focus group data. I'm Dr. Schweinhardt from the OSET team and working with PIRE. And hopefully by the end of this webinar today, we'll start with coding and categorizing the focus group data that you organized from the previous webinar, and then move from there into categories and themes and theories, kind of moving up from the bottom. And the hope is that you'll be able to connect your focus group data and the feedback that you receive there to your intervening variables so that you can complete the local context portion of your logic model. Just as a reminder, these are the steps in planning a focus group. We've covered the major aspects of planning and conducting focus groups already. As you can see, the flowchart lays out the steps in the process. The red steps were completed by us here at OSET to help expedite the process for you, but we hope that moving forward, you'll be able to accomplish these steps on your own. So we're still in the data analysis stage of this process, but we're just moving a little bit deeper into our data now. As a reminder, the point of conducting your focus groups is so that each problem of practice, we can identify the intervening variables from SAMHSA, and then the focus groups help us identify the climate in our communities that are impacting each of those intervening variables. So the purpose of the focus groups in this data analysis session is to determine that local context and explain as well as describe. The SPF is set up as a data-driven process. Our listening session data combined with our comms data drives our strategy selection. The purpose behind doing the focus groups was so that our data is culturally relevant to our community and we can affect community level change. Sometimes the comms data doesn't tell the full story, so our listening session data will support the comms by providing us with richer information to determine how our community responds to changing conditions. So the last webinar covered data analysis steps 1 through 4. We talked about what the qualitative data analysis process consisted of, that it was iterative, process-oriented, continuous, and comparative. We also talked about what to do immediately after the group, what to do with the transcript, connecting the dots, and bringing the first stage of data transformation to bear. So at this point, you should have already debriefed with whoever was assisting with your focus group and organized your thoughts. Send the recording to your transcriptionist and organize that transcription according to delineations by speaker and by your guiding question. Today, what we're going to cover are data analysis steps 5 and 6 to get you ready for the reporting stage. So we're going to move from taking basic categories and concepts in the analysis phase into interpretation, where we take those categories and come up with theories and themes that express the local context in our communities. So where you should start at the beginning of this webinar from last time is that you've organized your participant thoughts from all your focus groups on each guiding question into a single document. So you have documents for each question that make up the entirety of your focus group information. The goal after this webinar is to take these pages and pages of organized responses and convert them into a summary, ultimately a 3 or 5 paragraph summary that you can use in a report on your listening session. And this should detail the impact that the local context of your community's intervening variables. So I just wanted to show this infographic from Holiday for a second to get us a sense of the process that we're going to be going over today. So we start with this raw data from our focus groups that represents the messiness of reality. And we're transitioning into step 2, looking at the overall character of what we have in our data and searching for natural division. And Because throughout the process, you've been reading your transcripts over and over as you organize them into guiding questions and delineate different speakers, you're already really familiar with what the overall character looks like. And this is the point at which you can start looking for those natural divisions. As we kind of mentioned, hinted at previously, and we'll talk more about today, these categories and concepts should flow naturally out of the data because you'll start to see them as you read more and more that people are saying similar things. And then we can move into, once we have categories like that, we can move into step 3, the creation of themes and theories that help us make further sense of the data, delve a little deeper, get a little more abstract, which then helps us move into step 4, that will be the subject of the next webinar, moving into writing a report about our data. And we'll come back to this infographic throughout the webinar today. So the next step, like we talked about, is step 2 in data analysis from Holiday, or step 5 in our process so far, really starting the analysis. We're going to start coming up with our coding schemes and sorting and categorizing our responses. So you've probably already seen, again, as you've been reading and rereading your transcripts, that the quotes from people in your focus group can be grouped into categories. And what the ultimate goal of this to come up with is, why can they be grouped? That's the question you want to ask yourself when you're reading. You can see similarities and differences between quotes as you constantly compare. And why are things similar or different from each other? And that question will really help you start to make your categories. If many people are saying the same thing, then those things should be grouped together. If someone's saying something different, or just a single response says something different, it might be a minor influence, or it might be a different circumstance that you need to consider as a subcategory or something that you need to explain from this larger category of responses that you see being repeated over and over. So as I mentioned, comparisons are very important. You should be comparing quotes to others for similarities and differences constantly throughout your data analysis process. You want to group similar quotes together and look for concepts among your quotes. These concepts form your categories, and some categories might have subcategories. As you move through your data analysis process, again, it's an iterative process that you'll be going through over and over, and you're constantly comparing a single quote to the category that you've started to form, you can see slight differences or discrepancies between your quotes that may, in fact, create subcategories or different categories altogether. So by constantly comparing, you'll automatically start to correct any errors or miscategorizations. You'll see how your data are evolving into the true categories that represent the focus group information. So once you get towards the end of your process and feel like that you've categorized all your responses, take a step back and ask some of these key questions. What are the properties and dimensions of the categories and concepts that you've come up with? What conditions give rise to different categories and concepts? And this is a really important question to ask when you see one person maybe saying something a little differently than other people. What are the conditions that that person's comment relates to that may have made them say something different? How is it that that person is expressing the category or concept? What consequences are produced? And are there instances when the concept was contradicted by the data? How can you account for these discrepancies? So again, if you see differences, what is it about that local context, the conditions, properties, dimensions, and consequences that may be able to explain that discrepancy? So we're taking just the sorting of our categories kind of to the next level with these questions to explain the properties, dimensions, conditions, and consequences for each of our concepts. So once we have the data categorized, the next step that we want to move into is interpretation. This is where we provide theory to provide structure to our data, and this is Holiday's step 3. We're trying to find kind of headings that we could put onto these categorized responses that represent the meaning behind each of the categories. This is where we're going to be finding links to our intervening variables that we can link back to our problem of practice. And as we'll get into in a few minutes, we're going to provide you with a template that you can use to take these interpretive theories to your report level. So we've talked about concepts and categories, and now we're moving into theories that summarize the information. So as you can probably see, this is a building up process. Once you have these groups of concepts and categories, subcategories will emerge, and you'll start to really understand your data. And then at this stage of interpretation, your ideas should start to get more and more abstract as key ideas are identified. In a sense, you're really boiling down your data into the basic essence of what your focus group participants were trying to say and connecting that back to our 4 intervening variables. It's really difficult at this stage to give you examples of what this looks like because every circumstance for every focus group is slightly different and everyone's data is going to be slightly different. But the ultimate goal is to connect what your focus group participants were saying back to the intervening variables. So OSET already built the guiding questions for your focus group scripts to lead your participants to the intervening variables of interest. Then your community's intervening variables and how they feel about those variables will form your theories at this stage. So the goal is to determine how your local context impacts these intervening variables. How do the categories that you've sorted and come up with and the concepts that you come together to answer the guiding questions that we provided you with regarding each of the intervening variables? So just as a reminder, the intervening variables that we're looking at are perceived parental disapproval, approval, or attitudes, perceived peer disapproval, approval, or attitudes, family communication around drug and alcohol use, and perceived risk of youth and harm. So the guiding questions that OSET provided you were structured so that when you are organizing your focus group data into those guiding question pages, they would already be organized into each of these intervening variables. So at this stage, you're just trying to basically answer the main question of how do my focus group participants feel about each of these 4 things? So again, once you feel like you've got an idea of what the theories of your data might be, take a step back and ask yourself some key questions. What is the main idea in this research? What major categories emerged? And these are questions you can ask for each of your intervening variable organizations. If I could describe what these people are saying about this intervening variable in a few sentences, what would it be? Or even a few words, and then we can expand from there. What does all the discussion that occurred during the focus group about this particular intervening variable seem to be about? And how can I explain variation between categories and concepts? Again, it's very important to consider when you have discrepancies and differences, what the local context was, what the consequences, how that person was expressing the difference, and how you can explain it. Because the discrepancy or difference shouldn't negate your category, especially if a lot of other people are talking about the same thing. But we just need to take a moment to explain why we might have seen that difference. So this stage is really about looking for patterns. You want to verify your concepts and categories by comparison. You should have already done this. But again, a single incident is not enough evidence to support or contradict a hypothesis or theory or theme that you might be seeing. It just needs to be explained. So you shouldn't be disregarding contradictory evidence. On the contrary, you should certainly be including it, and it could be evidence of a different circumstances. So again, ask yourself this question: why is this negative case or this difference or this discrepancy happening, and how can I explain it? Rather than ignoring it, for sure, we don't want to throw out data, or taking it to mean that all the things these other people said about your category were wrong. Again, a single incident is not enough to contradict a lot of other data, but we want to try to explain differences. At this stage, it's important to keep the broader context in mind. Think about the economic conditions, cultural values, political trends in your community, and how they might be impacting the things that people say. These could help explain some of your discrepancies, for example. It's also important to remember that even though we've finished the coding and categorizing stage in theory, your coding scheme will evolve and change throughout the data analysis process. Again, it's an iterative process that's constantly comparing itself. So don't be afraid to recategorize or reorganize even at this stage. Consider variations of context, subcategories, and conditional relationships when you're coming up with your theories and themes. And don't forget about transferability. So, speaking of transferability, new situations will never exactly match the circumstances under which we conducted our focus groups. However, the general trends and ideas should be similar under similar circumstances. So even if you went out and conducted another focus group with the same problem of practice and the same script with the same population in mind, you wouldn't necessarily get the same statement. However, the general trends and ideas would hopefully be the same, and that's the idea of transferability. And you can see this between your two focus groups. I'm sure that things that were said in the first focus group that you conducted were slightly different than things that were said in the second, but you can also see trends that move across each of the focus groups and were talked about in both of them. So we want to get to, again, boil it down to the essence of what our communities are saying. So general trends and ideas should be similar. But it's also important to make clear the population from which we're making our claims when we do our reporting and when we talk about our theories, because new situations will never exactly match the situations under which we conducted our focus groups. I want to bring up another thing that we talked about in the first webinar again, just as a reminder, and that is the idea of using multiple reviewers. So I thought this quote from Richardson really captured the purpose of using multiple people. Crystals are prisms that reflect externalities and refract within themselves. What we see depends on our angle of repose. So again, we talked about using multiple reviewers in the previous webinar, but what I hope you can see from this quote is that crystals are prisms and multiple reviewers also reflect externalities and refract within themselves. So each person that looks at your data is going to come at the data with a slightly different bias in mind. And discussing inconsistencies and disagreements between reviewers can help resolve these inconsistencies and increase your credibility and dependability. And it can also help you see the data from a different person's perspective and come up with your theories and themes in a way that's more applicable to a more general audience. So going back to Holiday's infographic, we're now in stage 3. We've taken our concepts and transformed them into categories and transformed these categories into themes and theories. What we've done here at OSET is created a worksheet for you for each intervening variable and each guiding question for your problem of practice. And what we're hoping is that by putting all of this information in one place, we can get to that stage 4 of Holiday, the reporting stage, a lot easier. So what we'd like you to do once you have your theories and themes from each guiding question is to fill out this worksheet, putting in your coalition name and county at the top in red there. You can see all the red text is for you to fill in, and all the black text is what we've already filled in for you. So Pick your priority substance. There will be a worksheet for each intervening variable. So the one we're looking at here is the one for family communication around alcohol use. Again, there's 3 others for each of the intervening variables. You want to insert your problem statement here that you can fill out for each problem, as well as your priority population. And both of these should come directly from the problem of practice report that you submitted previously. Then in this first column, you can enter the comms consumption data from your problem of practice. This can be pulled directly from your comms data. And the point of having this column here is to link your problem statement and priority population to your consumption data, so you know what's happening in your community at this point. And we've completely filled in the next column for you. The construct column is linking the quantitative measure from comms and the qualitative measure from our focus group to the intervening variable of choice. So in this case, it's family communication around drug use. So we've put the construct from the comms data. During the past 12 months, have you talked with at least one of your parents about the dangers of tobacco, alcohol, or drug use? In for you. We've also put the qualitative measure. What is the tone, demeanor, and perceived effectiveness of family conversations around underage drinking? How can these conversations be made more meaningful and impactful for youth? That is your guiding question for this intervening variable. And so this construct column is filled in on each worksheet for each intervening variable and each guiding question. The next column is your quantitative measure outcome. So here is where you would enter the family communication around underage drinking data, the data you have from your quantitative measure, and be sure when you fill this column in to include the data source and year. So this information is coming from your comms data. Eventually, if you've read ahead while I'm talking, you'll see that this can help you inform your strategies, if not the report of your listening session specifically. But we thought it would be really helpful to have both the quantitative and qualitative data in one place. So then the next column is what we're really dealing with in this webinar. The root cause and local context outcomes will be where you put your theories from your focus groups related to family communication around, in this case, underage drinking, or whichever variable you're filling out the worksheet for. Again, you want to include your data source with each theory, and this is where you're putting your theories and categories that we've been talking about creating this whole time. So one thing to keep in mind when you're filling out this worksheet is the idea was to keep everything on a single page. So your theories really should be, again, the essence of what your focus groups are saying, and all of your theories for this intervening variable should be able to fit in space. When we were making these worksheets, we thought that it would be helpful, again, to have your comms and focus group data in one space, because eventually this will inform the last column, the strategies you choose to address this problem of practice. But this is not something that you need to complete now. We left this column here as a reminder that there has to be a connection between the problem statement, the intervening variable, the root cause, local context, and the strategy. And so both of your data sources will inform your strategies, but this is not for you to fill in now. So for the next stage, you want to fill in all the red text only, the problem statement, priority population, your consumption data, your quantitative measure outcome, and from this webinar, your theories from your focus groups. And that's all you need to complete on this worksheet now, but it will help us in the long run come up with our strategies. Just to give you a little bit of preparation, and something that can help when you're thinking about reporting, is that the idea of reporting the focus groups is you want to provide new insights on the topic. Use your themes and theories as headings and limit the number of key points so that they will be remembered and that they're insightful. As I mentioned earlier, that worksheet is meant to include all of your theories, so you shouldn't have pages and pages of key points. If you find yourself with many theories, then I want you to take a step back and really consider if you've boiled down your data to the essence of what your focus group participants were saying, or if more things can be linked together. You should always verify findings with other staff, and this is what we talked about being important to have multiple reviewers so that you can resolve inconsistencies and see another person's point of view and not impose your particular crystal's bias on the data. And your report should be brief, clear, and concise. So thank you very much for attending this webinar today. At the end of the webinar, you should be able to organize your focus group data into theories and themes. And the next webinar will handle transitioning those theories into a focus group report.